We now come to the urgent question. Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster if he will make a statement on the Government's approach to redacting or withholding documents within scope of the humble address agreed by this House on the 4th of February this year.
Secretary Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've set out to this House on previous occasions, the Government is working to comply with the motion passed in February. I can reassure the House that this remains the case and can provide the following update today. The Government confirmed before prorogation that it had referred over 300 documents to the Intelligence and Security Committee, which at the time represented all of the documents in scope of the motion, where the Government believed that publication would be prejudicial to UK national security or international relations. The Government has repeatedly assessed all of the documents it has collected to make sure that all of those that need to be referred to the ISC are referred to the committee. As part of this quality control process, the Government identified a small number of further documents that it felt should be reviewed by the ISC and immediately submitted these documents to the committee. As Friday's statement from the committee set out, it has now considered all of these documents. As I have previously said to the House, the Government will be publishing a second tranche of material. This is currently being finalised and will be one of the largest government publications ever laid in this House. This is reflective of the breadth of the motion and also the Government's commitment to transparency in responding to it. It constitutes a very significant disclosure exercise involving sensitive material from across government. The Government has taken seriously its obligations to comply with the humble address in full, while also upholding other public interest issues, such as our duty of care to junior staff. The Government has carried out this work according to a robust process, with assurance from an independent KC. Given the House is due to rise on Thursday, Mr. Speaker, and given the length of the publication, the second tranche will now be published after Whitsun recess to give the House sufficient time to review the material and to be able to ask me and the Government questions, Mr. Speaker. It could have been published this Thursday, Mr. Speaker, but I felt that the House would deem that to be inappropriate, given it will be such a significant publication. Mr. Speaker, I just refer back to my previous comments. This will be the largest publication, other than I think the Chilcot Inquiry report, ever published to the House. When the Government publishes this second tranche of documents, we will also publish a methodology confirming the process we have followed, and it will be clear from the published information the basis on which content has been redacted. The targeted redactions made to the material, beyond those made relevant to national security or international relations, have been made in line with clear precedent set by previous administrations in responding to humble addresses. As I said out to the House on the 23rd of February, and again when we published the first tranche of material on the 11th of March, we have taken the normal approach to redacting junior officials' names, contact details like telephone numbers and email addresses, the personal data of third parties where this is not in scope of the motion, and where relevant, legal professional privilege. This has been done using the principles set out in the Freedom of Information Act and in line with the Ministerial Code and the resolutions on ministerial accountability passed by both houses in 1997, which state that ministers should be as open as possible with Parliament and not provide information only when disclosure would not be in the public interest, which should be decided in accordance with relevant statute. I'm sure members across the House will recognise there is no public interest in the Government publishing the names and contact details of junior officials or their telephone numbers. Mr. Speaker...
Order. I don't know, I know you've been here quite a time, but it's 3 minutes. We're over 3.5 minutes now. And I wasn't given notice of extra time needed, and obviously the other people would need to know that. Please, I did set out rules of the House. We should adhere to them. Once again, we've broken them. We've only been back a few days. Secretary Jones.
Forgive me, Mr. Speaker. In that case, I will sit down and answer further detail in answer to questions from members of the House.
The next round. Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting this urgent question. Thank you to the Minister for what he has said. But as you and the House know, the Intelligence and Security Committee has been considering redactions to documents on the grounds that, if unredacted, those documents may prejudice national security or international relations. But it has become apparent to us that the Government also intends to redact documents for other reasons, not specifically permitted in the humble address, or in some cases, to withhold those documents altogether. Now, as the Minister says, the Government did issue a list of further grounds on which it intended to redact, along with the first tranche of documents that it published, including, as he says, email addresses and phone numbers and what's described as personal data, though there is, of course, no mechanism for the House to confirm that those redactions are limited to only what is necessary. But I want to ask the Minister about material that the Government intends to withhold for yet further reasons, for example, due to commercial confidentiality or to protect the monarch. The Government also intends to withhold some documents related to vetting in their entirety. Now, Mr. Speaker, I make it clear that my committee has considerable sympathy with the substantive arguments the Government may make for withholding information beyond that currently justified in the humble address. There are, for example, valid concerns about the disclosure of information given in a vetting process, inhibiting future subjects of vetting or those who are asked about them from being as open and forthcoming as they need to be for vetting to be effective. But we cannot accept that the Government is entitled to ignore or to unilaterally alter the terms of the humble address. So does the Minister accept that if the Government wants to argue that the humble address is too broad as drafted and needs to be refined, it must come to this House and make that argument and get the House's consent for any alteration? Does he further accept that without doing so, when the next set of documents is published with information withheld, then the Government will not succeed in persuading this House or the wider world that this matter is closed? And finally, does he accept that if the Government takes it upon itself to redact or withhold information contrary to the terms of the humble address it agreed to be bound by in February, that would be an issue not just of process, but of parliamentary sovereignty?
Secretary Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In relation to the questions from the Right Honourable Gentleman about compliance with the humble address, I refer him to the statement I've made previously in relation to the principles set out in legislation and the motions of this House as I set out. I think he's asking me specifically about personal data that was collected as part of the security vetting process. And as I think he alluded to in his answer, the raw data that is collected as part of those investigations, which, for example, might relate to how much money you have in a particular account or who you may have had a personal relationship with in the past, that raw data would never be published, because if we did so, people would feel unable to answer those questions honestly and frankly in any UK security vetting investigation in the future, which would undermine the very basis of our national security system.
Matt Weston, Chair of the Joint Security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have certain concerns just really around the amount of WhatsApp and other channels that have been used for very informal but important communications between officials and ministers, a practice that seems to have started very actively under the Johnson government and continued thereafter. So that would be my first concern. And then the second is about the use of low-level IT systems for quite serious documents of record. Can he update the House on what is being done to tighten up these really important channels?
Secretary Jones.
Can I thank my honourable friend? I agree with his concerns and similar concerns that have been raised by the Intelligence and Security Committee, both on the extensive use of what we call non-corporate communications channels, but also in respect to information that should have been on a higher level of classification that was shared at official sensitive. I've already announced to the House there's going to be a review that will begin imminently on the use of non-corporate communications channels, and I'll be taking further action to make sure that sensitive information is shared at the appropriate classification.
Minister.